Welcome back to another episode of the Thunder Sock Show, collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, your liberty, your pursuit of property. This season is focused on EOS implementers and the Get It, Want It, Has Capacity, or the GWC tool, and how to work on your business, not just in your business. Today's special guest is an expert EOS implementer, Matthew Todd, out of the Pacific Northwest. Matthew, thanks for being on the show. My first question for you is, what point did you realize that you got it, want it, had capacity to be an EOS
That's a great question, Ross. And having just done our local MCE, where we get together and collaborate with the local implementers, we were talking to several of the newer implementers about that because some of them are still struggling to find their rhythm. And I too struggled immensely in my first 2 years of my practice. I really didn't get it. I wanted it. Oh boy, did I want it ever. But I found out I didn't have the capacity because, like a lot of people, I thought I had an awesome network. And when I reached out to that network, thinking how awesome they were, I found out that they still perceived me as a competitor and they weren't that interested in what I was talking about. So I had to learn how to talk to them. And so I always like to tell people there were three things that brought a confluence point where it changed everything. And the first one is I had to burn my boats. And I find that's being so common that people are holding on to some other income stream or some other activity or anything. But I will tell you, anything that takes your time away from building your practice is interfering. It's making it harder. And until you fully let that thing go, and I bet almost every implementer in the community could probably tell you the same thing is like until that happens. So that had to happen. I had to let go of my old business, and that was 2 years after I'd left it. I had to figure out how to operate on LinkedIn. I did not know. I was not a tool that I knew how to use, and so I got some help. I got some help with somebody that coached me, elevated my game, got me some conversations. And I like to tell everybody that by the time that program that he put me on ended, and I shut it off and said stop, I still had 50 conversations that I never made with people simply because it started coming in so fast that I wasn't able to respond to it. But what it taught me was how to talk to people that I did not know about this thing called EOS and what vision, traction, and health really meant. And the third thing was I got some coaching that said I need to be talking to people every day, whether I thought they were a client or whether I thought they were a friend. I just needed to talk to another human being. So I got on board, and a lot of the people in the community know this, about 5 meaningful conversations a day. You need to talk to other human beings, whether they're other EOSIs, whether they're clients, whether they're anybody. And you don't approach those conversations trying to get something out of somebody. You try to approach those conversations to give something to them. They may not take it. They may not want it. They may not need to hear, but if you just make the connection, have a meaningful conversation, at least you're talking to another human being and you're not wrapped up in your shell. And by breaking through all three of those things, along with a really, really magnificent opportunity that one of my existing clients, I only had two at the time, invited me to one of their peer groups. And those three things came together at the same time so that when I was invited to get in front of that peer group, I was ready to talk to them. And it was a group of people in my industry. It's the people I liked. I knew some of them. I did not know all of them. And he invited me in there. I got up in front to start talking about EOS, and he talked the entire time. I don't think I got 2 words in, and I walked out of that meeting with that peer group with 6 clients. And that was my breakthrough moment. That's what changed everything. I would like to say that everything I'd done up till then, the grinding, the calls, everything else had led to that moment. So I was ready for it because that was what changed the course for me. And that's when I got the capacity. That's when I got the total get it. That's when I really felt like things were coming through for me. But Ross, that was almost 2.5 years in. I had a struggle getting there. So um,
Yeah, a 3-year overnight success.
yeah, right. And you hear a lot of stories like that, right? It was an overnight success with 10 years of effort, right? So I had to come out of the space that I was in. I was a consulting design build engineer. I laid out systems for buildings and people that knew what I wanted, and to convert to a solopreneur lifestyle where I actually had the conversations with people that may not even have known that they needed what I had to offer. In the previous business, people called me because they knew what I had to offer and they were
Mm.
already doing it. So 10 years later, I'm kind of back in that mode where my clients know me. They say good things about me. I now operate 90% on referral basis. And, it's come around full circle for me. From, like any business, you have to build, you have to make a name, you have to brand yourself, you have to become relevant. And then once people know you, they trust you and they can start talking about you with others. So that's where we're at.
You made an interesting point about, I'm tying this back to the GWC, right? There is a subset of people, like I used to sell consumer product goods and like in the pet industry, where the people that were buying the stuff Matthew, knew more about it than I did, right? For those of you that are horse owners,
Yes.
that's a fanatical group of people that love their the joke we would make is like it's typically 80% women, and of that 80%, 90% love their horse more than their husband. It's like, it's a joke, but they're super high. So there was a lot of people that just say, "Hey, do you have how much of this do you have in stock? Do you have this and that?" But then when I started going into more of the consulting, the fractional space, I was it was the reverse. It was like I'm
Mhm.
so passionate about spreading the system and the lessons learned, the frameworks that people like, "Oh, you help with marketing." Well, yeah, kind of, but this is
Yeah.
it was educational. How
Very
how
much.
did how did you and you also have a background in sales, it looks like sales
Yes.
engineering, and so you're
Yes.
talking to people all day. That probably wasn't the hardest thing for you,
Right.
but talking to people that maybe didn't know what they didn't know. How
Correct.
did you try to address the not not sales pitching, but education part of things, like to, raise awareness?
Yeah. So part of it, like I said, was in that LinkedIn thing, learning to talk to people who I did not know and was not familiar with, wasn't even sure why we were talking in some cases, and didn't even know every time that EOS might have been the connective tissue, right? And so we have a thing in EOS we call VTH, the VTH speech, where I say, EOS is about vision, traction, and health, and we have this pattern that we do. And I was in that mold, memorizing it, saying every word, and I honestly felt like I was throwing up on people when I talked to them on the phone, right? Because I had a script. And I've always had a reticence and a real pushback against scripted sales presentations. And so I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be myself and be natural. And the beloved Don Tinney, who everybody in our community will know of, stood up at one of the QCEs back in Detroit back in the day when we met there. And he offered his version, which included every single word that was in VTH, but he made it Don's version of VTH and just gave me the release and the permission to say, these words are important. How I present them is also important because it needs to flow in a way that's conversational and engages the other person. And that was what I just puked on people. I got to tell you, Ross, for the first 2 months of that program that I was on, it took about 6 months. And eventually I started smoothing that out to where I wouldn't have somebody hang up on the phone. They would actually stay there with me and they would like listen to what I have to say. And it got better and better and better. And I needed that. I needed that floor time. I needed those reps. I needed that experiential breaking things, ruining it, coming back and seeing what was wrong with it and just starting over again and getting VTH molded into something people would listen to and hear what I had to say. And I came out of that with clients. I came out of that with, interactions, and I came out of that with making it worth the while to spend the money to have that coaching. And it really put me in a position to move forward. But that became then so important later on when people say, "What do you do?" As you just got asked, what do you say that's going to help? And then you get into we practiced this the other day on an elevator. There was like 5 of us on an elevator. Okay, who can do this thing really quick? We got 6 floors to go. What do you got to say about what you do? Right. And that's always an interesting topic in conferences, but it's a real thing if you have somebody there that actually could use what it is you have to offer. Gosh, learning how to play in that space, no matter where it's at, on a plane, in a line at the grocery store. I mean, those are rarely places where I'm sitting there marketing myself, but you never know where it's going to come from. You just
But because you
don't.
did the reps,
Yes.
I think that's such an interesting tie back, Matthew, to one of the themes of, working on your business versus in your business.
Yeah.
The thing I'm getting from the story is that, working on your business, if you don't have the contextual repetitions and the framework and doing the work in your business as something to reflect upon and be like, what did I learn here after these dozens or hundreds of calls? And then the other thing is, you went from basically like talking to people, one on one. You had two clients at one point, you're just kind of getting your rhythm. And then somebody else spent a lot of that time talking for you. So like the
Yes.
work compounded to the point where you feel like you're pushing the boulder up the hill and you push the boulder at the top of the hill and it rolls and you get six all at
Right.
once.
Right.
Leads me to the idea that like working on your business, the point is when you do it in that way where you make those strategic pivots, those big almost like 10x greater than 2x thinking, you get compound interest. So what I want to tie back is, you've been at this, started 2015, expert EOS implementer for years. You've seen a lot of stuff. For some of the people that are just starting out, maybe they're 12 months in their EOS practice, 90% of their customers are not necessarily referrals. What is something, knowing what you know now, that you would impart and say, hey, try this? Kind of like what Don, his delivery unlocked something for you.
Right. And I mean, again, you were just kind of characterizing it as I was listening to you speak, and it's part of what it is when you're working in the business. Because I mean, I could argue making those phone calls was very in the businessy. I didn't know until later how much on the businessy that was, because like I needed those reps, right?
Mm.
And I was actually working on my business at the same time I was working in it. And sometimes I think all of us have to reflect upon that, because we talk about the journey from being 80% into 80% on. Like that's what the EOS journey is supposed to take us from as a leader in our organization. Well, sometimes we don't know which one of those we're in the middle of. Um,
True.
and yet later upon reflection, which is what clarity breaks are for, is like, okay, that's how that came together. And so one of the consistencies, and I was talking to Lauren Shaver at our recent QCE, and we were talking about EOSIs joining the community, how to get really great EOSIs. And one of the things that's kind of consistent is, again, the burning the boats thing is massive. Like if you haven't burnt your boats, you got to really change your expectations about how well you can do doing this, right? If you're holding on to something else, it's going to keep you from being as great as you want to be as an EOS implementer. That's clear. I can tell that story. I've heard that story so many times, I can't even tell you. The second thing is almost everybody has a really, really great story of a breakthrough. And what I mean is a breakthrough comparable to my client inviting me to his peer group. Everybody has to have a version of where all of a sudden I picked up 4 clients. All of a sudden I got to 10. Whatever that massive leap in there, especially people that are experts, I think everybody would probably admit, like, yeah, there's a point in time where I got some help. It came from somewhere. I
Mhm.
wasn't planning on it. I didn't know that was the day. And to your point, being ready for that day is really your primary responsibility until that day comes, right? And
Isn't that what luck is? When
yeah,
preparation meets opportunity,
right,
preparation
right.
meets opportunity.
Yeah. And so that's the thing I'm really starting to work on, because I have some folks locally that we really want to try to help them and elevate them. And of course, we feel that way throughout the community. You know that we're a help first community. We'd really like to see everybody succeed at this. And sometimes you got to get out of your own way. And that's
Mm.
part of it, is being ready when the moment presents itself, and not being so fixated on I have to do a talk, or I have to do this, or I have to do that. You got to be ready for those moments where opportunity presents itself and you're online to do it. And a lot of times the hard work to get there. And again, I ground, man. I spilled things. Made a mess, and I had to clean it up. And I think sometimes that cleanup is the real lesson you needed to learn, right? Is what did you have to do afterwards to make something right? And what do you have to do afterwards to go back and maybe do a follow up that you didn't feel comfortable doing? Those early things that, I mean, it's so easy in hindsight to think, wow, I don't have to do that anymore. But I still do. I still make mistakes. I still say things in a room that I shouldn't have. I still, I push sometimes harder than I want to with somebody I think that has that resilience, but something's going on with them. But you don't always know that. You don't always know what's happening with your clients. We use the term elephant in the room, and we can sense it, we can feel it, but rarely do we know specifically what it is. And sometimes by entering the danger, you get to find out, but boy, you have to clean up afterwards, right? And I got some powerful wisdom this week. The idea that came through Jeanette Wade through one of our local implementers, Julie Marquis, and she said one part of issues
Oh,
resolution
I
is you
love Julie. She's great.
don't leave open wounds, right?
Mm.
And so sometimes we can do that, not intentionally. I'm not out there with a scalpel and a knife, trying to open people up, but sometimes it happens. And part of resolution is you got to leave that in a place that wound's not wide open. And
Mm.
I just loved that. It just totally resonated with me. I had a couple incidents during annual season because, as you know, on Team Health Day, there's things that come up. There's things that happen. There's words that get said that sometimes that you're not involved with, but the team is, right. They're having to kind of retract and figure out what's going on from their team health perspective. And it's part of our job to at least put those wounds. If we can't put a bandage on it, we got to know what to do next. We got to figure it out. So
There's
yeah,
a lot there to unpack, but one of the things that I really want to touch on is the idea that, EOS is a human energy optimization
it,
framework. That's the goal. And I think one of the things that lessons from hearing your story is it's like, look, John Wayne, courage is not the absence of fear, it's feeling fear and saddling up anyway.
yeah,
Entering the danger isn't the absence of making mistakes, or it's not doesn't mean you're perfect. There's never any wounds or hurt feelings, acknowledging that that can happen, not having the fear that it will happen, and having the fortitude to rectify, um, open wounds, like you said. And that applies with your own. Let's just say someone just started, they have a sales conversation they really wanted to close, and that person, for some reason, didn't felt the other way. It's like, okay, pick up the phone, try again. What happened? I might have zigged when I should have zagged, said this instead of this, didn't ask enough questions, whatever, but not losing the enthusiasm. I think that's one of the things I can already tell from your story is, it's not that you don't make mistakes, it's that you don't let the mistakes be fatal or serious injuries to what you
Yeah.
do.
And to that same point, Ross, it's like you asked early about GWC and when I figured it out as an EOS implementer, but I can't tell you the heartfelt stories that I get that really impact me is when I come into a session room and one of my team members, usually not the integrator or the visionary, frankly, it's usually some other team member says, man, I'm trying this stuff at home. I've either given them family BTO or not, and they're ready for it, but they're telling me how the things that they're learning in our session have actually helped them improve their relationships at home. And it's like, I see this open wound thing happening there all the time because the people we love dearest are the ones we can hurt the most.
Mm,
And using and applying that idea. And I mean, the words came to me this week during our MCE, but I mean, in real terms, you find yourself having, used some of those tools with your family, with your friends, with your loved ones, and how powerful they can be with these ideas within EOS are foundational human principles, as you said. Managing human energy is one of them. But the idea that so many of these ideas that we think are just business things actually are human being things. And if we can put them in the right place, they can really be applied well and service in many different locales, not just in the session room in a quarterly or whatever we're doing with our business and our leadership teams. So it's powerful stuff.
I ask you and a question offline about specific behaviors or patterns that tell you when a client or a prospect may truly get it, to work with you or work with EOS. And I think the answer that I'm getting from this story is when it hits close to home. And that could literally mean when it affects their home, when it makes a real impact on their whole well being, their whole life, right?
Yep.
Like when you can look at it as not just a checkbox to click, yep, I went to my session day. Yep, I, did my homework. When you can actually have it impact your family, right? Because that's the trickle down. It's not just the leadership team, it's the people in the company. It's not just people in the company, it's the clients, it's their families, it's the community. So hitting close to home is definitely a sign that they get it. What are some, and I think you've done an awesome job of, not just your LinkedIn presence being, well done, right? But that's part of it.
Mhm.
You've done an awesome job of saying, who I am, who you're for, right? You have deep background in construction. So I'm sure people that, want to try out EOS and like you that are also in construction, great fit. What are some of, I think the hardest part is the anti, who I'm not for. I'm not saying industry, I'm saying like what kinds of people or what kinds of, whether it's their location, their size. Like, I know you like firms that are 50 or more employees. That's like maybe traditional. But how do you, if we had a role play as how is it just a starting out EOSI, how could you help give feedback to help people not try and get hung up on helping everybody, right? On
Mm.
getting the right
Yeah.
fit. The right fit means there's not the right fit too.
Yeah. Oh boy. To me, that question only works from the perspective of this tool that we use called the 90-minute meeting. That's our first actual, what we call our first session together. But it's meant to be a litmus test and help everybody sort out whether the fit is right. I mean, because you're
Two-way
trying to
street.
be how you are in the room so they can see you. We have many times where multiple EOSIs are talking to a client. And of course, early on in your journey, you want a client, right? And so you're not as concerned about fit. And
Mhm.
later on, you're going, man, fit matters more than everything because I want to have fun doing this. That's part of what, doing what you love with people you love. That's part of what we want to do. And if I'm not really having fun in the session room, that's not good for my client. I'm not taking good care of them. And I
Mm,
probably won't do the right thing by them. And so, I mean, I want that as desperately as I want them to want it. No, they don't always know. That's the thing that we have to curate as EOS implementers is truly own that 90-minute meeting as a test and
mm,
let it be what it's supposed to be because I want the right decision for that client. And frankly, that's secondary, the right decision for me, because if they're not a good fit for EOS or for me, it's not going to work. Our good soul in the EOS community is Walt Blair, and he says, if you drag clients in, you're going to drag them around. That's not just EOS, that's anybody everywhere. If you drag a client into the relationship with you for no matter what your business purpose is, and I could tell you stories in my previous business that were the same way. If I worked too hard to drag them into that relationship, oh my gosh, it was like a boat anchor the entire time we were doing work together. And that's not any different here. I think the difference here is what we do tends to be a little bit more soulful, like we were just talking about, and it does pierce into people's lives. Because when we first introduced that first tool in Focus Day called Delegate and Elevate, that is one of the first places where I find out if somebody's really, really serious about making change. And I will tell you a story about a Focus Day where we got into that, introduced that tool, and I can immediately tell that the visionary was pushing back on it. And then we started getting into the accountability chart. And he literally would not let his team, although we developed a version of the accountability chart, his name ended up in every seat. And I'm just going,
What?
he's pushing back against Delegate and Elevate because he is not willing to let go of this business and let his team rise into those doors. And that was the last session we had together because I realized this was not a good fit. Like he was not ready to pursue this
Mm.
process. And I've found that since then, in reflection and knowing this, the seriousness of intent that every leadership team member takes in engaging with that Delegate and Elevate tool, like when they come back to VB1, and if they do not have that tool built out and populated like we tell them to do in Focus Day, I know it's going to be a bit of a struggle because that immediately impacts what's going to happen with their accountability chart. If they can't do Delegate and Elevate, their accountability chart is going to lag, and all evil in the world is nested in that accountability
You
chart.
can't
And
move on to the next thing.
yeah, they can't do it. They won't do it. And so
Oh.
they're stuck where they are. They want to create the version of the business that they currently have and hit rinse and repeat. And that is never, ever going to get anybody where they want to go because either the world or somebody's going to force change. We call it hitting the ceiling. That's what the name of it is. It's coming, baby, whether you want it to or not. And you don't get to vote on that. And are you going to be ready for it and be willing to do something about it? Are you going to remain stuck where you are, choosing not to evolve, change, and develop and grow so that the world's just going to wash you over? Because
But
that's what's going to happen to your business.
that's what it really means to not let go of the vine. And I think to your point, it's not an industry thing or a
No.
size thing. It's a behavior pattern where I think this is like incredibly important where if you can sense that they won't let go, that could mean like what you're talking about with the delegate and elevate tool, they just won't delegate, period. That's an obvious sign that if they're not going to receive feedback or have it be a two-way street where, one's an impenetrable thing and the other one has to be porous, then you can't have a back and forth two-way street
Right.
relationship.
Right.
And the other thing that I got from that, Matthew, is, it's if you can give somebody the tools, but if they don't want to use it, they're like, no, I like my tool. Well, then
Yeah.
why are you talking to me about,
Yeah. Yeah.
tools?
Yeah.
Like I'm here to help you with new tools.
Yeah.
Not every
Yeah.
problem's a hammer. But speaking of tools, we had discussed a very interesting tool that you had you've implemented in your practice over the years around GWCing
Mhm.
your own client roster.
Yes.
Selfishly, I wanted to save one of my favorite parts of the conversation for the end of part of the conversation. Can you tell me a little bit about the framework that you use to evaluate, the client? Because you said the further along your practice, it becomes everything, right? Good fit clients. Can you kind of walk me through that whole process that you do?
Yeah. And so, I just have my own version of a tool that I built because at the end of annual season, I always take a deep breath and thank the Lord for the year that I've had and for the clients that I have and the life that I have as a result of EOS because it's truly a blessing. I cannot overstate that. I feel like I'm richly, richly blessed in every part of my life. And profoundly impacted by the tools and the way we use them and the growth that I've had and still want to have. I read a book every week just to keep on my game and to develop and to grow. And part of that is rating where my clients fit with me up to and including, do I need to maybe hand them off to somebody else? Is it time to graduate? All of those things are part of what you reflect upon. What their org checkup is. Are they actually leaning in? Are they growing and developing? And I keep this separate than my CRM stuff. That's my pipeline development. I've got this on a separate spreadsheet. And one of the columns that I list is how healthy is that leadership team? We have a facilitation within our EOS workshop that is led by Hank O'Donnell that he started it, and it's wonderful. It talks about teams and how they interact and engage. I rate them on that basis. I rate them on, do they love EOS? Do they love me? Do they do the, and I give them all scales of 1 to 10, and then kind of balance all that out. And then one of the things I added, probably I'd say 3 years ago, was the GWC columns, and I rate them all separately. Do they get it? Do they get EOS? Like, on a scale of 1 to 10. And I know we're supposed to do yeses and nos, guys, so don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what I do, because I think there's variables on the get it part, right?
Sure.
And then the want it part, boy, if they really don't want to do EOS and you're pulling them along, it's like, wow, that's time to have a serious conversation, right? That's just time to own that and say, look, we don't need to be putting each other in pain here. I mean, let's face the music and let's deal with this. And then capacity, because that's, as we all know, that's a little bit different. That's fuzzier. Like, what would it take them maybe to develop the capacity? But I will tell you, early on, one of the things I do tell my clients, like, literally out of the gate in 90-minute meetings, is I've never made it to my first annual with the same leadership team that I started EOS with. That's why I trust the process, why I love the process. That's why the process does what it's supposed to do, because almost everybody actually needs EOS, because there is a right person, right seat issue that they've had difficulty dealing with and sometimes 20 plus years, 10 years, whatever. It's been a long time. It's a brother-in-law. It's their
Hmm.
original founding partner. It's whatever it is, because it comes in all shapes and sizes. And the business is different than it was. And in order for it to become what it needs to be different yet again. And what that means is that group of people that's been running it, probably it's either outgrown them or they've outgrown the business, one of the two. And there's time for a change. And that's why Collins tells us the number one priority of leadership is getting right people in the right seats, because everything you do is harder. And so that's one of the fundamental things in the journey. If we're not doing the right things, delegate and elevate, building the right accountability chart, owning those fundamental tools, we're not making those movements the way they need to. Using the people analyzer on our leadership team with open, honest discussions, like, this core value, that is the problem. That's a deal breaker. We can't play anymore because one of the original guys here, doesn't follow that core value. It's a value to all of us, and you're not doing it. And, like, really being able to say those things out loud so that you can move past them. And yeah, people can get hurt. People do get upset. People wonder what happened to them in some cases because they didn't see it coming. But those breakthroughs are what changes everything for the business. And they've been around, they've been nurturing them for so long, they've almost forgot that they're there. And one of the things that EOS tends to do is prompt that. I like to say that it expedites the inevitable. In other words, something was going to happen anyways, and EOS just turns up the speedometer on that so you can get to there quick, right? And it's best for you and everybody around you if that happens.
There, just like one of the other answers to questions, there's so many places I could do follow-ups, but we only have a short time, so I'll keep it short. Number one, I love how it sounded like you're evaluating capacity on reflecting on how much did the leadership grow and change in a
Hmm.
12-month period. And if
Hmm.
people just look at their lens and stop looking at, like, on this date, it's like a final, like a picture, a snapshot versus the movie of the time period, and almost like what Dan Sullivan says in The Gap of the Game, it's like, yes, so much we're focused on where we're not at today. But when you look back and you're like, well, how far did we come from the year prior? That is an awesome metric. And if I
Yes.
would reflect and look at my own clients and start incorporating, like, well, how far along did we come since when we started? Because I've had some great results, but I've also worked with clients that were already great. And I've had some
Okay.
results with people
Okay.
that the stuff was a mess and it became not a mess. And it's like, wow, it's a huge gap. And then the second thing you said is you do this to evaluate, there's your CRM, your pipeline of new prospects, and then you have your current. But one of the things I urge people to take away as an action item is think about doing what Matthew said for his current clients, and then being like, if I could have more of these, like, how closely does my pipeline measure up against the standard for current? Because the goal, like you and I have discussed, and you've affirmed for me, is not just more revenue, not just more sales, not just more customers. It's increasing the amount or the ratio of right people, right seats, right customers that you're serving. Because sometimes serving less customers that are better is the right path, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
One more question, Matthew, because I know we're right around time, is, and it's not deep, is how can people find you and get in touch?
Well, I'm on the EOS Worldwide website. You can find me. My email address is matttodd@eosworldwide.com. I have a website if you want to go take a look at that, called packcrestbe.com. EOS.com, and happy to have those elements come out there. And again, I'm willing to talk to any EOS implementer or anybody out there that's interested, just because I need my 5 meaningful conversations every day. And so I'm happy to chat. And so I work on that still. That's not what I call biz dev. That's just called being in the game. And so that's the world I like to live in. So happy to bring that about and chat for any reason that somebody finds value.
Thank you for listening. I don't run ads in the show, but I have a special ask, and that is take some of the tactical examples of things to work on your business from Matthew today and go and use them, whether it's at home with your family or in your business. Until next time, everyone, be well.